This is Anna Hamilton with the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program at the University of Florida. Today is Wednesday, June 12th, 2024, just before 2:30. We're in the tax collector's office in Escambia County in Pensacola. Here in the conference room, we have our Gulf scholars with us, as well as Becca Burton, our coordinator, and Deborah Hendricks, and we're here to interview Rich Stone for the Pensacola Environmental History Project. Great, so I would love for you to get us started by just introducing yourself, however you feel comfortable.
Thank you. I'm Rich Stone. I've worked here in the Escambia Tax Collector's Office for 44 years, and I started, obviously, many years ago at 16. I've held most every position of trust other than being an accountant or an IT guy, and my experience has given me a lot of wisdom in terms of what works and what doesn't work when you're dealing with people that don't pay their taxes. Not just the delinquent enforcement side, but the fact that every parcel is significant and a lot of parcels have challenges. And I think that's one of the reasons we're talking today about our Superfund parcels. So I've been here a long time, and I don't know everything, but I'll do my best.
Great, thank you. We're very keen to hear about that. Before we kind of dive into the Superfund side of things, we're going to ask you a few questions about like your family and your life history.
Okay.
So how long have you lived in Pensacola?
I'm a native Pensacolian. I don't know that there are a lot of us, but my dad was from upstate New York. My mom was from Alabama, Mississippi, something like that. Both, all the above. Kind of a mixed marriage, Southern Baptist mom, Roman Catholic dad. But it was a good upbringing because I got to see different parts of people's values and beliefs, and just, you know, I appreciate the diversity of people because my parents were very different.
How did your parents meet?
Well, they both were counselors, vocational counselors. My dad was hired sight unseen from California to be the first vocational counselor at Pensacola Junior College, what we call Penn State now, Pensacola State College. And my mother worked with Florida, back in the day, it was called the Florida Employment Service. It's Job Service Florida now, I understand. And because they were similar background, they met professionally and decided, I guess, they wanted to have twins, and I'm one of them.
Nice. And what brought them to Pensacola?
My mother's family came with the railroad. When you lived through the Depression in the South, and you not only didn't have the means to pay for things, you didn't have the place to buy things. You went where the jobs and the money and the prosperity were, and her father was a railroad man. My father had left New York to move to California, lived in San Diego, had an academic background, and Pensacola Junior College, which was a pretty new institution at the time, wanted to hire a vocational counselor. He later became the director of counseling and held some other administrative positions. But we ended up here mostly through the employment opportunities that they had in the late 50s, early 60s.
And tell us about your sibling, your twin.
Well, Robert's a really interesting guy. I said earlier in a joking fashion, he would tell you he's 6 minutes older and wiser than I am, and he probably is. He and I think we're more alike than people might see looking at us, but the truth is, everyone says that we obviously are twins. I won't go too far into the aspect of how unusual it is to have someone so close in the same town with you all these years. It's almost maybe not natural to have, you know, people move away, they take jobs, they look for opportunities elsewhere, but we've both been here our entire lives.
And what neighborhood and community did you grow up in here?
We grew up in Myrtle Grove, which is on the west side of town. My parents had become friendly with an older gentleman who homesteaded a great deal of property and had a very large pecan grove and a big 6-bedroom, 4-bath house. And we had half brothers and half sisters, one of these great blended families. And we needed, I guess, some space to run. So we grew up in almost not an agrarian situation, but I mean, my dad worked this pecan grove when he wasn't at the junior college. And so it was a very happy, not an urban upbringing for me or Robert.
How interesting. So many families, it seems like, are very connected to the outdoors in some ways here, it sounds like a pecan grove, the waterfront. Can you talk a little bit about that side of growing up here?
This is absolutely the best thing about Northwest Florida, I can say, is that it's a beautiful place. We have all the benefits of being coastal without having, and of course it's very different now, but we don't have tons of high rises. This isn't Biscayne Boulevard up here, but what people do appreciate is the beauty, the nature, all the activities that come along with it. Ecotourism was not a word, in the day, but it certainly is now. And another really great thing about Pensacola, beyond the natural and environmental aspect of it, is the notoriety of things like the Blue Angels, who fly over my Florida room every Sunday night at 6 o'clock sharp on their way to the Wahoo Stadium. It's just kind of a really neat thing to live somewhere that things that other people don't frequently get to see or appreciate just happen all the time. And I think we're just very lucky here. And the people are good too, for sure.
Well, this is connected, but I heard you say it's not usual, like people usually move away and you take jobs in other places. What is it that you think has kept you and your family here?
Well, for me, it's definitely the fact that I had this tremendous opportunity in high school to come to work for the tax collector and have never had any other job or any other experiences. There's an organization here in town that was started by Quint Studer, who I mentioned before, Pensacola Young Professionals, and the entire genesis of that was, can we keep some of this talent in Pensacola, Florida? People move to Atlanta and Tampa and Orlando, and they don't stay here to show what people from here have to offer. And even though it just happened that I was here, now I see this effort to build up what we've got here in terms of our human resources. And I guess we're here because we want Pensacola to be as good as it can be, and surely we're adding to it.
I understand that completely. So tell me about the opportunity that you got in high school.
Well, as I see it, I was kind of, I won't call it seduced, but I was impressed greatly by these professional young ladies that came and talked about a job program in high school. It was called Business Cooperative Education, BCE, and it shortened my school day, which appealed to me. It brought revenue streams of a whopping $2.85 an hour, which appealed to me. But moreover, I wasn't sure what I would want to do. I knew what my dad wanted me to do. You're going to be an accountant. It took one class for me to figure out that was not what I wanted to do. But I fit very well into this position, I think. It gives me a chance to meet people I would not meet anywhere in life, I assure you, and help them and try to show a little humanity to very random people.
And what was the position that you came into first starting out?
I was the tag boy. I brought license plates up from the basement and made sure they were all accounted for and that they, looked like a license plate should look. And I learned from that very first job that everything that happens here is important. You don't want the same tag number out there on two cars. You might have a bank robber in one and the mayor in the other, and the tag numbers are the same. But what you learned was no matter how menial what you did was, it mattered. And I've always tried to impress upon the people that work here, our motorists, our taxpayers, our citizens, they deserve the very best we can do for them. And they're quite likely not going to come in here, may I speak frankly?
I wish you would.
They won't come in here necessarily using our brand of deodorant or mouthwash. They're going to be who they are. And we have to have this absolute positive, unconditional regard to help them, whatever their situation is, whether it's delinquent property taxes. I mean, what's more important than where you live, where you're domiciled, where your kids are, and where you feel safe? Even if it's a motor vehicle thing, you've got to get to your job, get your kids to school, keep your life moving. And so I try to impress upon people that this sometimes thankless job is more important than they will probably know. And the difference you make in people's life that they're rarely going to go out of their way to thank you for is more important to them than most of what we have an opportunity to do from day to day.
That feels like a very particular value, and one that I would imagine that maybe not everyone shares. Where do you think that value came from?
Well, for me, it came from my very first boss, Mrs. Breeden. She was this stalwart German woman that taught herself to file by reading the phone book and seeing how things were alphabetized. She was just this amazing self-made person. She worked in a ball bearing factory in Schweinfurt, Germany, came over here to work in a gladiola farm in Fort Myers down in Lee County, and ended up here with her husband, who was a fireman. And her thing was, I'll never forget her saying that she was such a smart lady, and a couple of things she told me, one of which was, if you think what you're doing is important, you must pass it on to the right people at the right time, the right way. And she certainly did that. And the other piece of advice, one that I'll never forget, is the only thing worse than getting up and going to a job every day is getting up and looking for a job every day. And I've never looked for a job, so I can't validate that, but I've talked to a million people who can. They'll tell you that's the truth.
It sounds like she was an important mentor for you.
She certainly was. She was one of the biggest influences in my life. You know, you put your parents first because they got you here, right? And beyond that, the people that believe in you and lead you to believe that you can do something important have bigger impact on you than anybody. It's what I think.
And I'm still thinking a little bit about your parents. And you mentioned that your dad wanted you to become an accountant. Mm-hmm. Why did he have that wish for you?
Well, as a vocational counselor, you want to find a place for everybody. And he wasn't much of an ideologue. It's very interesting. People from the North are so different than people from the South. In the South, everyone reflects on race, and it's such a big thing to be Black. But in the North, it's about your religion. And so, my dad, even though I don't think he had any particular predisposition against anyone, he knew if someone was Jewish. Because if you came to New York, you knew who was Jewish. And down South, you'd never give that a thought. I mean, at least in Pensacola, you don't. I know that sounds odd, but this is why I appreciate my parents so much, because I got such a good perspective on things, and I got to realize, it's all kinds of different people. And, the joke in the South is the difference between a Yankee and a damn Yankee. The damn Yankees stay, and the Yankees go back up north. It's probably not appropriate humor, but trust me, it's an interesting situation to live with someone that's very Southern and someone that's very Northern. It's for sure valuable.
And so what was your father's reaction when he realized that maybe you weren't pursuing the path that he had imagined for you?
Well, I think he thought that if I did not connect my career to my post-secondary education, that he had failed, because that's what he did. He tried to connect people's career to what they went to college for. And to me, college tells me you can finish something if you get a degree. I don't care what it's in. You can finish something, and you've got determination. And so when I consider someone with a degree, potential employee or for advancement or whatever it might be, I don't care what it's in. I'm impressed, and I think my dad felt like if you didn't pursue your career in line with your education, that something had gone wrong along the way.
That's interesting. And help me just a little bit with your timeline. So I understand you were 16 when you started? I
started here the month I turned 16, and after my first year here, it was a summer job, is the way it started out. But they said, if things work out, you'll stay here through the academic year. And it did work out. And after that, Mrs. Breeden, the boss that I had, said, I think you can do most anything. We're going to put you to work. And I was like, no more tag boy? Are we getting another tag boy? It's another school year, right? So I became what they called a seasonal employee. We had civil service board at the time. And they had to approve you on a roster to be eligible for these positions. And then once you were on their roster, then the appointing official, which is our tax collector, one of the 5 constitutional officers in the counties in Florida, can decide the basis of your employment. So every year when the summer rolled around, I stopped taking college classes and came here and worked full time for 3.5 or 4 months. And the other thing that does is get your foot in the door with the Florida retirement system and sets you up as a regular employee as opposed to a student. And, you know, back then, I'll just tell you, $2.85 an hour felt like a pretty fair wage. I know that's insane. And when we would work on the weekends, because something was behind, usually the tag renewal mail, we're like $2.85 times 1.5, time and a half. You know, oh my gosh, we thought we were rich. But that's how it started. And through the years, it's just been an opportunity after another. I worked on the counter for a long time. I worked in the call center for a long time. I was a deputy tax collector for a long time, an assistant manager, chief operations officer, and now the chief of staff 44 years later.
And what has felt like the best fit for you in kind of that journey here?
I love being the chief operations officer. When it comes down to it, for me, and this is interesting because people tend to look at everything as a hierarchy, and this was another one of Mrs. Breeden's insights. She says, Richard, I have seen the organizational charts. I do not care if you invert the pyramid. I do not care if it becomes a Metzaluna, or what she says. It's always a pyramid. Someone has to make the decisions. There's always accountability at the top. And somehow, when I became a chief operations officer and realized that we were looked down upon a little bit by some more senior staff, folks that work the counter, folks that answer the phones at the call center, I said, everything that happens here starts with a customer and a transaction and a payment. That's just a fact. We don't need accountants. We don't need IT. We don't need anything if we don't have customers, transactions, and payments. So don't act like we're selling popcorn at the movie theater. This is a serious, difficult job. And that kind of thinking led me to believe that operations was where I wanted to be. And we have 4 offices, 108 employees, and we have to be uniform in things. I can't have folks going to Warrington because over there they can get a tag for the tow truck that they won't sell them out at Molina on the north end of the county or whatever. And so the challenge of being uniform where it's important, being flexible when you can, and trying to find a way to help people comply, you know, instead of the thrill of saying no. And there are people that have that. I don't know where it comes from exactly, but it's this little bit of power where you maybe can say no, but that's not what you need to do. They're coming back tomorrow. If you say no, how about we find a way to get to yes today if it can be done without contravening the law? Did I answer anything?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I was just asking about like the many different roles that you've had here and what has felt like the best fit for you. I'm also curious where there may be places where you've like had particular challenges.
Well, I tell you, when I first went to the call center from the counter, that shift of I can look at everything they brought to me versus I have to visualize everything they brought to me. They'll call on the phone. You know, I've just bought a vehicle. Do you have a title? Well, yes, I have a title. Well, they may have a registration. They may have a bill of sale. You don't know what they have, but it may not be a title. So you're visualizing all these things instead of having the source documents and everything in front of you. That was a huge shift and a challenge for me to be able to actively listen, you know, asking the questions. Does this title appear to be on some heavy bonded paper and it's somewhere it says any alteration voids this form? 50 titles, 50 states, all different, but every one of them says alterations void this form. You have to make sure, you know, that you've really got the awareness of what they're trying to do and what's in their possession. And it's a complete shift from having it in front of you to look at. That was a challenge for me. Beyond that, I always felt very comfortable being able to encourage people to at least do as well as I did, because the truth is, and I've said this to people, I think when I came, I thought if I just work a little harder than everybody else, everything will be fine. Now that lasts for a while. I've told our deputy tax collectors, they've all heard this from me, there's a point in your career where, you know, you're launching this amazing, you're the guy, you've got the promotion, this is your position, and there's all this glory and all this greatness, and then you're just left with the job to do at the end of that, because the glory and the greatness doesn't last forever. But the job's what matters. And so I try to keep people understanding that and hire and promote the right kind of people that can pass that on, because I do want this all passed on the right way. It's just too important. It's too important.
Is there anything that you wish people knew about the tax collector's office that maybe they don't?
I actually wish that what they knew is that every one of us is living a life like yours. You know, well, I pay your salary. I mean, you're a fellow taxpayer. You know, you don't think we're paying taxes? You know, we've also got to take care of our driver's license. We need to renew our car tags. They'll say, well, you know, why aren't you open on Saturdays? We have to work Monday through Friday. We're working Monday through Friday too. You know, I mean, I guess what they should know is that we're not very different from them, and we want to help. But we can't, you know, we have to follow the law. We have to help you comply, not find a shortcut or, and I hate this word, loophole, my least favorite word ever. That's not what it's about here. So we'll do our best for everyone. I'd like them to know that. And we're just like you.
Thank you. And tell us a little bit about your time at college. Where did you go to college?
Well, I started at Pensacola Junior College. My dad worked there. It was tuition free. They let their folks, the children, you know, go without paying. And I got on through those years, went to the University of West Florida. Strictly local education for me, public education, local junior college, local university.
And what did you study?
Which time? The truth is I ended up in business. It's not really what I thought I was so terribly interested in. But the more time you spend in college, unless you really have some career path that you have figured out, like so many of the folks in here have, you've just, over time, it gets more general and more general and more general because you want a wide open field of opportunity, so to speak.
So we had lunch before we started recording this interview, and you had a little bit to say about the value of public education. I'm wondering if you could just talk to us again.
Well, I said sincerely, the way I feel about it is that public education does exactly what it should do. People, when you're in public schools, maybe you're a little behind other people, or you're not quite as smart, and they're bringing you up to the level. And if you're one of these brilliant, over-the-top people, mad scientists, they bring you down, dumb you down a little, and everyone meets the middle so we can renew our car tags and driver's licenses and pay taxes and recognize that there's accountability for what you do and don't do. But to me, it's that kind of get everyone on the same level where we can communicate. And that is, to me, the real value of public education. We all have the same opportunity to learn the same thing. Surely we picked up some of it together so we can do what you have to do in a society, you know?
Thank you. I'm going to switch gears just a little bit, and we can come back to anything else that you want to talk about at any point. But so we are talking to folks who were in some way involved with some of the Superfund sites, whether their families were connected to the factories that operated, or the cleanup now and the subsequent work that's yet to be done. And so as a lifelong Pensacolian, am I saying that right? Pensacolian?
That's right.
Tell me about your community or your family's connection to some of the factories that are now, of course, not in operation.
Well, my family didn't work for any of these operations, but one thing that was well understood in Pensacola was that our Naval Air Station, which is a very strategic facility this is the cradle of naval aviation. It all started right here in 1915, if I have the year right. I can't promise. Anyway, the thing is, jet fuel and all this waste that is associated with aviation, there were Superfund sites that were not called that at the time out of the Naval Air Station. There were large cordoned off areas that you just could not go near. They would let you onto Barrancas National Cemetery. They would let you onto Fort Barrancas, which is one of the 4 forts here. Fort Barrancas, Fort Pickens, and Fort McRae had this triangulation at the pass into Pensacola, which is a deep water port, which is, of course, why we have a lighthouse. I've tried to explain this to people for years. You don't get a lighthouse unless you're a deep water port. But the fourth one is the advanced redoubt, which people don't know much about, and that was the notion of an attack by land as opposed to coming through the pass. But so there were parts that you could go to, and there were parts that were completely off limits, and the understanding was this is a very unhealthy contaminated situation going on here. We don't let anyone over here. And at some point, we came to realize these were not the only contaminated lands out on the Naval Air Station. In our tax roll, we call that the account, because the Naval Air Station is an island. It used to have two communities on it, Warrington and Woolsey, both named for generals. And Woolsey just went away when the government took over the island, and Warrington came out to the area where the main, and at that time the only access to the Naval Air Station was. It's still called Warrington today. Well, that realization that it's not just the Naval Air Station that has these issues. Creosote is a huge thing because of a coastal environment. And it's described usually as a toxic witch's brew of the most dangerous, deadly chemicals, long-lasting chemicals. And essentially, that's where our mainland Superfund sites came from, Escambia Treating, American Creosote Works, and folks that, just had giant pits of creosote that they soaked poles and pilings and all this kind of material for docks and marine construction in.
And do you remember some of these factories from when you were younger?
I do. There was also a fertilizer one. That's probably the one I remember best, Agrico Chemicals. They created a scenario where this large toxic bloom came under Bautahar, which is, really part of our very urban, maybe not the urban core, but it's part of this town. I remember Agrico. It smelled funny, like a paper mill, sort of. I don't know if I can describe it perfectly. I think Escambia Treating had closed by the time I was conscious of these things. I knew about American Creosote Works because of these huge fences with razor wire and this kind of thing, and you would have thought it was a prison, except there was nothing there. It was just land. And, so what are they trying to keep in or keep out? And you knew something was going on there, but you didn't know exactly what.
And when did you realize just like the level of toxicity that was associated with those sites?
Well, I began to realize it when I saw certain things happening with delinquent taxes that struck me as outlier situations. High value tax certificates not receiving any bids to hold this lien. Florida's way of enforcing a delinquent tax is to privatize the lien that represents that year's taxes, costs, fees, and interest with an individual, and they bid an interest rate for holding this tax certificate, and it's a first lien on the property, superior to all others. Doesn't matter if you've had a mortgage 29 years or whatever. The taxes imposed under Florida Statute Chapter 197 are a first lien, superior to all others. It's a very secure kind of thing if there's value in the property. So you see some things that don't have much value. You turn into a subdivision, you see a little island with a sign, the name of the subdivision. Well, it's not, you might be able to put a hot dog stand there and torture the neighbors, but it's not a lot of value, right? But here were some high value items that people had ceased to buy liens on. And when you don't buy them, they're struck to the county, and the county holds a lien at the maximum level of interest possible, which is 18%. It's like credit card interest, when you bid on them, they get down to a mandatory minimum of 5% payout, and they bid even less sometimes. And that's all a function of other investment opportunities. But once I saw that we were striking big money to the county, that investors didn't want to hold these liens, then that made me curious about what was going on with these properties. And then I discovered, that was Escambia Treating. That was Agrico Chemicals. That was ACW, American Creosote Works. And as I said, it was kind of evident too, if you lived here, something's going on with these properties. But that's really when I became aware that the property had no value because of this extreme toxicity, as you've said. And it wasn't something people knew much about nowadays because the industry was so much in the past, but these people were rich that owned these businesses. We would send tax bills. This one mansion, I'll never forget it, over at Harborview near Pensacola Country Club, just the biggest, nicest house in Pensacola almost. And they're getting this tax bill on this Superfund site and ignoring it send back, return to sender, not our property, not our address, whatever, just trying to walk away from it when their whole fortune was derived from it. And to be fair, I don't think there was a lot of consciousness about these issues in the day, much like a lot of what you read about China and the fact that they're catching on now to what we caught on in the Nixon days of clean air and water and the development of the EPA. Those were the Nixon years. I like to give credit where it's due.
So you were noticing this trend at these sites around the same time?
That's when it occurred to me, this is what's going on here. This is why there's no value to people to hold these liens. And they could have had it at 18% interest, just like it would be struck to the county, but no one wanted it. Well, 18% interest, who wouldn't take that? Any day, any time, any year. But nobody would buy them at some point. And it was the awareness. Another thing had happened. Tax certificate buying became more of an institutional game. Not exactly like today with hedge funds and this kind of thing, but nevertheless, big buyers with access to a lot of capital started spreading out in different counties, and they got sophisticated about what they were going to hold these liens on. Because once you have the lien, we don't have debtor's prison, we can't beat people out of the money. So the mechanism is you would file a tax deed application and force the property to be sold to pay off the delinquent taxes. And if no one bid on it, you got the property. So people started seeing this tremendous environmental remediation liability piece that certainly people were very conscious of at that point. And it just convinced me that there was no price at which people would see this risk as worthy of undertaking. The best way I can explain it, and they certainly didn't want to own it. And the people who did buy these certificates thinking 18% is fantastic, as we were winding down to nobody would buy them, they were allowing their investments to expire by statute of limitations years down the road. Instead of filing a tax deed application, we don't keep your investors by that arrangement. People invest because they want a return, and they were literally giving up the value of these kind of high dollar liens down the road because the tax deed application, which is essentially the foreclosure mechanism on these private liens, was not something they would risk, that anybody else would bid and get this property off of their hands. So it just kind of short-circuited the way you enforce delinquent taxes, which of course is a concern to us. I say if everybody pays their taxes, we can all keep affording to pay our taxes, and if it doesn't happen that way, then we all better watch out, because this is the thing about the tax roll. I tell our deputies, if we're not paying attention, nobody is. I don't care who else you think in the county is connected to this. It's us or it's nobody. And we wanted to find a way to resolve this. And about that time, I guess, is when I met Eric Spalvins from the EPA in Atlanta, who was very active in the community. Another fellow named Pete. Eric had Scambia Treating, a guy named Pete Joyner, EPA also, had American Creosote Works. And these young guys were so powerfully eager to make a difference. And it was almost like a calling to them. And they weren't from here, and I am from here. And I admire them greatly. And I thought, well, what can be done? How is this going to play out someday? And in the meantime, the notion of we need to collect the taxes assessed on the roll. I may be getting too deep into this. I have another thought, which is that the statute in Florida says if the county holds a tax certificate, and this is that concept of no individual bought this lien to privatize it, so it got struck to the county with no bids at 18%. Well, if the county holds it and the assessed value of the property exceeds $5,000, the county must apply for a tax deed on it. Okay, well, you're going to put this thing up for auction at public outcry, nowadays on the internet, back then at public outcry on the courthouse steps, literally. And some unknowing person is going to end up buying into this massive liability. And the county had no say if they wanted to follow the statute to file the tax deed application at $5,000. Then we began to work with the property appraiser I don't know what you think this is really worth, but I promise you this, when no one will hold a lien at 18%, it's not worth the kind of money you got on that tax roll. And of course, we don't know a thing about what anything's worth over here. We're the collector, we're the cash register. We're not the guy running around putting the prices on things. But the property appraiser didn't understand our end and what necessarily was going to happen in playing out these delinquent enforcement procedures if they couldn't line up this value a little better below that $5,000 mark. But part of the thing about the separation of duties and responsibilities is we are not supposed to be involved in value. And my thing is, if everyone understands the procedures and the requirements, they might, Senator Everett Dirksen said it the way I love it, the more they feel the heat, the more they see the light. And the truth is, the public was getting outdone at some level of awareness with all of this, and it did become a sort of a feel the heat thing. And so a lot of our accounts in these sort of special situations, they began to get those values down. And what is it worth if no one wants it? You know, I mean, I have to ask myself, I'm not a property appraiser. I understand there's 8 conventional ways to consider valuing property. You're supposed to come to the best and highest use value. If nobody wants anything to do with it, and you've got to mark it off with fences and razor wire, you know, be sure to let me know where that value is. I don't see it. The value's probably in the fence and the razor wire more than that land that they've got on the tax roll. So we started working with the appraiser to try to get them to see it our way a little more, but being very careful because we don't step on values, they don't step on collections. That's the way it's supposed to work.
So it sounds like, and this isn't a very sophisticated question, but this sounds like this track in response from you all, like some alarm bells were kind of set off in your mind about what is going on here. It's not common for you all to kind of collaborate across maybe like agency boundaries or office boundaries. Is that fair to say?
Probably not exactly. We do collaborate, but there are bright lines in the sand that you just don't cross with the responsibilities of another constitutional officer. But public awareness brings a mighty pressure to bear on public officials if they need to be elected. And I believe in electing public officials because there needs to be accountability. And I'm kind of a purist. I don't love recalls. I don't love citizens' initiatives and amendments and what. I mean, how about we elect the right people? They don't do it right. We elect some better people. You know, this is just me, you know. But I do know that when the public becomes aware of things they do not like the person they've been voting for doing, they're going to look for another way or they're going to look for another job, and that's powerful.
And can you talk a little bit about what that pressure felt like on your office and the folks that you were working with at that time?
One thing that occurs to me is that the word activist, it's an important role, but it's a word that empowers people, some people, with a sense of, I don't quite know how to put this. There's probably a perfect way to put it. And I'm not going to search for it. I'll just say it like this. Activists had become more aware and were coming to more public meetings. And Florida has the most open, you know, sunshine, government in the sunshine. Reuben Askew, Pensacola native, if you didn't know, was the governor when all that occurred. And it's just wide open in Florida. And once the people start looking, and the people that consider themselves an activist, sort of like some immutable, expressive presence about what they see as transgressions. And the transgression, to me, was back when they didn't know better than to dump this stuff in the ground. It wasn't deep well injection back then. We have that in industries now, right here in Pensacola. I don't know how I feel about that. It hadn't affected property values. It hadn't caused me not to be able to sell a tax certificate or you know, cause a tax deed application to move through. But I do know in this other situation, between the activists, the awareness, and just people in those communities, and this is what I loved about these two guys in the EPA, Eric Spalvins and Pete Joyner, they got out there and engaged the communities. And one of these sites is right by the Pensacola Yacht Club. It's been around since, I think, 1911. And if they had not approached this If they just come in, yeah, we work for Washington, but we live in Atlanta, and this is what we're going to do. And no, they got in here and got the buy-in for the change of how we've got to make this situation better. The more populations grow, the more you need every bit of the land that you've got. That's my rough thinking on it.
Yeah. And I'm curious, you've brought up Eric and Pete a few times. In what capacity did you work with them? Like, what did that work look like?
Well, it was funny. Every time they came to town, and they would come to meet with Keithley Wilkins, who I understand y'all know and we'll be speaking to. And Keith would always call me, hey, we're going to go to lunch. We're going to step down the street, we're going to go to lunch, or possibly happy hour or something, But I got to know them kind of personally, and I realized this wasn't just, hey, I'm on the job in Pensacola kind of a thing. They cared about our community, and that's how I got to know them. And then I started describing what our challenges were. We can't sell these tax certificates. And the point of the tax certificate being sold is this. The investor gives you the money that was assessed on that property based on the appraiser's value. That's how they become the private holder of the lien. Well, all the taxing authorities, the school district, Board of County Commissioners, Pensacola City Council, Town of Century, and so forth, they're budgeting based on the value and the millage rates they set, and this is how much money they need to buy new school buses and re-roof the schools and public safety and everything that public dollars pay for. And if they don't get the money, there's no less need. They've budgeted for it. We've got to sell it, or that money's coming from nowhere. And they strike it to the county doesn't go, well, here's the tax money. But it's not all the county's money. We had a county attorney one time say, this is just an exercise of taking money out of one pocket and putting it in your other pocket. Well, that'd be fine if it was all the county's money, but what about the school district? What about City of Pensacola? What about water management? There's all kinds of taxing authorities that have budgeted based on this value. And this is the construct of it. The state can have the sales tax, and the counties and municipalities can have the property tax. But you can't get it if you don't find an investor and you don't have a willing property owner. And that is where we had gotten to with these properties.
And so again, kind of catch us up on what happened after that.
Well, we had some people that were probably a little too smart by half. I like that expression. I don't know whose it is, but I like it. And they decided that, I think I said it this way once before, and I'll say it this way again. We were doing what we could to warn people. There's a tremendous environmental remediation liability. And we're talking tens of millions of dollars with these parcels. They weren't always giant parcels. And they were affected differently. One of the three Escambia treating parcels was commonly called Mount Dioxin. And and again, Eric and Pete are the experts at this. But once the seal was broken and someone acted like they knew something the others didn't know, then the others fell in behind, oh, they know something, they're gonna make some money. I'll buy a tax certificate. I'll, take this on too. And once that seal was broken, then we once again had people out there who either had to give up their investment at the statute of limitations point or file a tax deed application. And some of them did. And Pete and Eric both one time said to me, there's about 3,000 counties in America, and I think y'all the only ones selling Superfund sites to your citizens. And I said, well, not on purpose. And secondly, if they're in Florida, unless their appraiser's on board with getting every value below $5,000, you're either in statutory noncompliance or you put it up for auction at public outcry. There was nothing in the law that said what we had to disclose or could not disclose. The only way out of the liability was in Florida statute, chapter 197, if a county or if a governmental subdivision, whether it's county, city, or whatever, acquires a property by involuntary alienation, they do not get any of the environmental liability for that parcel. And so that's what is called an escheatment, E-S-C-H-E-A-T-M-E-N-T. It's a tax word, but what it means is nobody would pay the taxes. Nobody would buy the property when the county would file the tax deed application. And 3 years from then, anybody could buy it. It's sitting over in the clerk's office in something called a list of lands available for sale. Anybody could walk in the door and pay up the taxes and own the property. But if it sat there for, at that time, 7 years, now 3, and this is a law that we helped to get changed. We're not big on policy, but we need our delinquent enforcement to work. And it was 7 long years to get to that point. That's a long time. So we changed the statute, I think, in 2011 to 3 years before properties as cheated. And we sat there with our fingers crossed watching these things every day in the clerk's office, the list of lands available. 1 more month. And our deputies and I would get excited about, that it's coming, this is cheap, it's going to happen. And then another thing that's interesting in county and city government is the leadership at the top is changing all the time. And you're not getting any kind of random group of folks here. Where were you the county administrator last? They're moving around like this. And a lot of the time in Florida to different counties. And so not knowing the background, not being from here, not being invested, not knowing Pete and Eric, who could explain it like nobody's business. Oh, we'll put you in a hazmat suit. We're right up there on a golf court. I'll let you stand on a golf cart. I'll let you stand on Mount Dioxin. I said, no. You don't need me standing on Mount Dioxin. I'm not interested. But they could make you understand what it was about. And when the county got the large parcel at Escambia Treating by escheatment finally, and boy, there was an odyssey along the way. Someone tried to hijack the corporate identity of the company by filing a bunch of delinquent annual reports and paying an administrative fee. They'd been administratively dissolved as a corporation. Well, if someone comes on and goes, I'll pay up all those annual reports and the annual fees, and I'll file the annual reports. And then next thing you know, they're the company. They just list themselves as the board of directors, and they had put this thing on eBay to sell it. And as I've said before, these kinds of properties look really quite lovely from aerial photos. There's green grass, and you don't see any of the real underlying conditions when you look at them on a map. And so here on eBay, there's, 3 miles from downtown Pensacola, and I think it was 8 or 9 or 10 or more acres. Some of the details have left me over time because there are a number of these parcels here. But in terms of that situation, we had a super seller for eBay that worked here, and he got it off their site, which the county folks were not able to do. It was a very interesting progression, but when the county finally got it, one of our, I want to say this right, I don't want to say transient county administrators, but one of the ones that was here briefly. And he was a sensible guy, but he wasn't invested in the community. He obviously hadn't dealt with Superfunds before. And he traded the piece of land to the city. And then later, the county decided, the remediation piece is done now. This was Escambia Treating. And they had some potential use for the property, and they bought it back from the city. Now, I've worked here a long time, and in my experience, if it's a winner, the city gets it. If it's a loser, the county gets it. I came here, all the public transportation, city buses and all, it's all to Pensacola. They shifted all to the county. It's a losing operation, money-wise. The gas franchise belonged to the county. That ends up with the city. That's a winning deal right there. And through all these years, I've just noticed the city always seems to come out on top. The county administrators, especially the more brief their tenure is, I don't think seem to quite get this. But once again, we give it to them and they sell it back to us. It's been a real interesting progression to see what's happened. But the truth is, some of this stuff is going to come back online. They wanted to put the animal shelter there. They talked about some housing situation, affordable housing, and this and that. And I think now it's just kind of a question mark up in the air. But the good news is these properties don't seem doomed anymore. One of them ended up in the hands of a guy, Alvin Bostick, or Boston, whatever his last name was, who had bought it thinking he was going to make his fortune. And he went out there on a camper van and pitched up a United States of America red, white, and blue flag, front page of the News Journal. Well, that guy also had a little trip out there in the hazmat suit with the EPA fellows, and he stopped paying taxes immediately so it could go on to the next tax deed escheatment, process of tax deed application, sale, and escheatment. People see the light eventually, but it takes a lot. And then memories are short, and even the people who know, they'll move on. And this is why people like me might be important after all these years. I certainly have seen a lot, and I know what to warn people about. I try to make sure our staff knows all about it.
I'm curious, you mentioned the eBay ad for, was it Mount Dioxin?
It was, in fact.
How did you find out that that listing was there?
Well, Keith Wilkins, who is this fantastic guy that became the assistant county administrator and eventually the city manager. He started out as the director of Neighborhood Environmental Services Division, I believe, NESD. He called, and of course, we were seeing what was happening with the tax roll. But one thing I'll tell you is if you're a tax collector, you don't do a ton of ground truthing, as they call it. You don't necessarily want to see exactly what's going on the ground. So I tell people we deal with legal descriptions, deeds, tax bills, paperwork, but if it's where the fence is or what the condition is, environmentally speaking, of a property, we don't look hard into that. But Keith made us aware, and as soon as we saw, he sent us a link maybe, and as soon as we saw it, this big parcel of lovely green lushness that's 3 miles from downtown Pensacola, and look what a bargain it is. And it seems like we were the ones that looked in what's now Sunbiz, the corporate records in Florida, and saw that someone had paid up all these delinquent years, filed all these old annual reports, and identified themselves as the board of directors and officers of Escambia Treating. And so Keith's the one that called us, and we turned to our faithful former deputy tax collector who's moved on, Kwok Wong, and he was the super seller, and he had it off there in 5 minutes. And Keith thought we worked miracles, and I let him believe it.
What goes through your mind when you see something like that?
They're always going to figure out a new way. I mean, who would have thought to hijack a corporation long gone that has tons of liabilities and no assets and use that maneuver to try to take a bunch of money from an unsuspecting person? I mean, I'm glad I'm in this business because that one sounds pretty good too. If you could get away with it. What did you put into it? Nothing but the price of those annual fees for the years that it was administratively dissolved. People are clever, and they're always figuring out another clever way. These are the people that should put their good talents and intelligence to use in a job like one of ours, where you can be clever and make your money legitimately.
Do you remember how much it was listed for?
I don't, but I bet you Keith will. He's again, I'm not sure he's from Pensacola. He may not be. I've known him for years and years and years, but he is a Pensacolian, and he absolutely cared and was so on top of this and could bring together this community of people, any of whom might have some means to fix the situation or at least make it better, And Keith, he'll know the details of that. And truthfully, I'm sure we could look it up because it was one of our best effective things we ever did was to get that off so it could escheat, which it finally did. And then, of course, the great misfortune of let's give it to the city. Now let's buy it back from the city. But the truth is, all of that, I don't think it matters so much. What matters is that this situation has the attention it deserves from the federal government and these great fellows that cared so much, and local people that are invested here, and that people were smart enough not to just dictate, but to get people to understand this is what we've got to do and why we've got to do it. And they talk about how important the why is, and that's the only way you get people to buy in.
What is the status of these properties currently?
Well, I understand they belong to the county. The ones that have escheated do, Escambia Treating. Brian, did we have one? Can I ask him a question?
Of course.
Brian, did we have one?
Investment company.
Those people in South Florida. That was the breaking of the seal. There were these two guys there. I went to every tax deed sale in the division of what we do, the clerk of court sells the properties of tax deed sale, but we certify all the amounts. These are the taxes, this is the interest, costs, fees, so forth. You derive the opening bid for the tax deed sale from that, because the idea is make government whole on everything that's owned to them. If there's anything left, we're not trying to ruin anyone's life. We'll give it back to an extinguished mortgagee if that happened. I've mentioned these were first lien superior to all others. If your mortgage gets extinguished, it's just gone. But if there's an overbid and the government gets everything it's due out of it, then you can pay back a mortgagee that's been extinguished. You can pay back a property owner, for that matter, in this case, a long dissolved corporation. But the county, other than the one from the investment guy, it was so odd. One of the guys was running for county commissioner. His name was Mirza Ahmad. And he seemed to be a pretty intelligent guy. He'd bought tax certificates and he had been at tax deed sales. I sat there that day and I heard the clerk do this phenomenal job of scaring the hell out of people about these properties. And I mean, I would have run from the room if it was me sitting in there as an investor. But I think Mirza did the first one, and then that guy from South Florida did the second one, and that's the one that's due to us cheat here before too long. The next year, Brian Jackson's one of our deputies. I'm going to refer to some details here. Next couple of years. Well, that one. American Creosote Works has just got all the attention because is it called the Inflation Reduction Act? Is that the one that brought so many funds forward here before? Anyway, this is why the EPA and the Inspector General came to see, in terms of ACW, American Creosote Works, the one over near the yacht club and closest to the Pensacola Bay, had they done their work, I guess what the Inspector General was looking at was the EPA, did they do okay with this project? And they had a little criticism here and there, but mostly decided this was money well spent. And I'm not quite sure how I got to this funding issue with them. Oh, because that's not settled yet. Now, the American Creosote Works, there was a tax deed buyer who was a lawyer here in town. And we thought that he was probably an old school lawyer, nuts and bolts, you know what I mean? But the truth is, we found out after he bid on a couple of these properties and got the ownership of a couple, that he was an environmental lawyer. And then we started wondering what kind of insider angle is going on here. And I remember this guy's name. I'm not sure I should say it. You know how lawyers are. They'll sue you in a hurry. But the truth is, we could never get him to engage us with, hey, we're just a tax collector, but wondering what your plan is, what's your strategy. We hate to see properties go delinquent, and we're not trying to focus in on just this property. I think he thought he knew better than anybody, and so he got a couple of them. We still have 3 that come to my mind that are still in the name of individuals. But at the end of the day, whenever that comes, I think all of this is going to be escheated to the county. The county will avoid any liability from that transaction. And these individuals will be out there speculative investments on properties that they probably would have been wiser not to put any money on to begin with.
Do you have any idea of how many times these properties have turned over?
Since the days of being in the name of the company that defiled the environment, so to speak, no more than 2 or 3, and ultimately ending up in this escheatment, but it's taken some longer than others because someone along the way thought they had it figured out. And one of the things about American Creosote Works is that you cannot disturb any of the soil out there based on the status of the remediation now. Treating's been released, but ACW, and again, this is right next to Pensacola Bay, arguably the most sensitive, because the other one, the bio is one thing, but the bay is the bay. And once they said to him, no sir, you can't even dig up a shovel of this dirt. No matter if you own it or not, with the federal government, you can't do it. And everybody else knew what the situation was, and it'll come back around to the same as the others. It'll end up with the county through an involuntary alienation. The county will avoid the liability. They'll complete the project, And boy, does it feel good when they get to the end of the line. I'll tell you that. I'll never forget the look on Eric Spalding's face when this thing finally came in for a landing at Escambia Treating. And I was so proud of him and people like Keith, people that cared and did their best to make a better outcome.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, you speak on behalf of the government in some cases, but you also are a member of this community. And I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about just what the experience of living here and watching this play out and this awareness of the toxicity and its prevalence, just what that is like on that end for you.
Well, I do recognize that I'm probably a little more aware than some people because of the connections that we've been talking about. But at the same time, nobody's living in Pensacola because they don't want the benefits of living in Pensacola, the incredible, beautiful white beaches. When I was a young man, you walked on the beach, Pensacola Beach, Perdido Key, whichever it was, and you came home with tar stuck to your feet, always. Just these tar balls everywhere on the beach. And this, we're not talking, Event Horizon, Deep Horizon, I'm sorry, the oil spill. We're talking about 25 years before that. And so people were all up in arms about this. You couldn't go to the beach and not come home and find you some turpentine or something and get this mess off your feet. And that was small compared to some of what came along later. And people are here because they want these beautiful beaches and this white sand and this experience. They want their kids to grow up this way and to know that there's, beauty and magnificence and enjoyability, and the outside is much your home as the inside. And so I think the community came together with this idea of we can do this, and the federal government came together with we got the money, which is important, don't get me wrong. But as a citizen here, I mean, I've just been thrilled to see things moving in the right direction, and they've continued to do that, but everything goes slowly. This is not just a public sector thing. Everything moves slowly when it comes to getting land into the hands of someone that will use it for a prosperous purpose, pay their share of the taxes, and be accountable for the responsible stewardship, so to speak, of the land. And let me say this, I'm not necessarily great at holding the question as I sort of get into my pontification, but I want to make sure that I'm responding right by saying, it's the base of the question, I think, was, well, you're not just a tax collector, and I don't get to speak for all the government, but I don't even get to speak for the tax collector, but I can speak for 44 years of experience here. And it's just as important to me from my personal life as it is my professional life that I like that word stewardship, that we all see ourselves as part of this responsibility and do the very best we can so that generations from now, someone may be still enjoying all this.
Thank you. No, you're responding to my questions perfectly well. Yes.
Thank you.
I do want to open it up to the folks in the room. I'm going to take off my microphone and clip it on here so I can pass this around. Who's got a question? And if you'll just say your name.
I'm Beckett, and I was wondering sort of what you foresee happening to these properties after they're ceded to the county.
Everything seems to be focused on affordable housing nowadays. And when I say everything, I mean, it's probably the biggest issue in this community. Homelessness is huge everywhere, I realize, and in Florida, we're certainly no exception to it. You hear a lot about affordable housing, and then when it comes to be, it's not affordable. Recently, the city tore down a property at 925 East Jackson, which I will not call by name because they only call it by address now, but under the heading of building somewhat historical, but affordable housing more important than anything. That's what I would see in an effort to have truly affordable housing. Things that happen in a community in a planned way tend to be regressive. Do you know what I mean by that? And so I think that balance will have to come, but I imagine it will all be aimed more towards affordable housing than more toxic factories and such to reinsure a repeat of the past. I like the question, Beckett.
Anyone else?
Hi, I'm Caitlin. So I've noticed in recent years as like more people realize like the beauty of Pensacola, they want to come visit. And along with that, there's more owners that list their homes on Airbnb. Mm-hmm. So I'm just wondering like, what's your experience with like Airbnb owners? Like have any of them bought up these properties and then listed them? And like, what does that mean?
Well, that's actually really interesting. I will tell you that Airbnb doesn't appear to be a beloved institution here in Pensacola, but I think people worry about the characters of the neighborhoods, whether or not they are actually concerned about what the use of the property that way does. There's a ton of people that don't understand how homestead exemptions work. Florida created a law where you can, for 30 days out of a 12 full year cycle, you can rent out your property and keep your homestead exemption. Well, homestead exemption isn't about the amount of the exemption, it's about the cap on the value of the property. You can't have an increase in your taxes more than 3% in a year as long as your homestead stays on. Well, you rent something out past 30 days, it's gone, the cap's gone, the savings is gone, and you don't get it back. And so it's a tremendous disadvantage, to say the least, to folks who don't know what they're getting into with it. It certainly is what you said. People want to be here for their vacations, their ecotourism, again, these new words that weren't around when I was young. But I think Airbnb, I think the investment that I see from folks in Airbnb is sort of a situational thing, not it's not their idea of a primary, it's not the way they make their living. They see a situation and they take an opportunity when it seems reasonable. But that's certainly where the future's going. And I mean, there's no doubt about it. What do they call it? Verbo and Airbnb and these types of things, they're here to stay. I'm convinced of it. The question is, how do you control it? Where do you allow it? And does it just become the next I'd love to give you a good comparison. One of the best things is if you can compare something in a way that everyone follows it, and I'm not exactly sure what I should say there, but it's here to stay, I'm convinced, but there needs to be some control. I hope I answered.
Yeah,
Thanks,
thank
Caitlin.
I'm Leah. So during our lunch meeting, we had learned that you are an avid reader. I wanted to ask that apart from your living this experience, did you use any other resources or materials to learn more about what was going on around you, and how did you use that to become more efficient in your job?
I wish I could say yes. That is the best question, and if I said yes, I would be as great as I like to think I am. The truth is, my pursuit of reading is such it's so unpredictable. I have interests that just kind of follow the seasons. I don't necessarily want to read in the winter what I want to read in the summer. But I don't use it so much. I know, like our boss, the Honorable Scott Lunsford, the tax collector here, well, he reads a lot too, but he read about anything that's not useful, helpful, informative, and related to something like this. It's not that I don't care about it, it's just that I haven't really pursued it that way. And probably I should. I'm in what they call DROP, the Deferred Retirement Option Program. And when I first went in, you could work 5 more years. You're actually retired. They're putting your retirement deferred tax account. And it's the deal we worked for, but you can work a little bit longer. It could be up to 5 years. Well, then when they couldn't get anyone to teach the children in the public schools, they decided they'd expand DROP. And they gave teachers 10 years and gave everyone else 8. Well, it's not indentured servitude, and I didn't really even probably want to stay the 5 years. But what I'm trying to do is figure out, because a good friend gave me a book, and it says, well, when you're not, in my case, the chief of staff, what are you going to be? When people don't have to answer to you and be accountable for what you want organizationally, who are you going to be to people? And how do you figure out what matters? And so I've been very assiduously writing my thoughts down on this in a book someone gave me about retirement, just a kind of inspirational thing. And the truth is, I not only want to figure out how to do what you're talking about with my reading, I want to do some writing. And so I think, you know, we all work to be retired someday. Did anyone work for a hobby? Not that I know of. We all want to work, make some money, make a difference, and retire and enjoy our lives. And I feel like I'm on track for that, but I need to pursue the kind of things you're talking about. And I appreciate that. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you.
Hi, this is Beckett again. I was wondering, you spoke briefly about the sort of role that activists had in the ischemia treating site specifically. And to prepare for this interview, we had to read a lot of media reports, and it seemed like the coverage was nationwide. And I was wondering sort of how that amount of media coverage maybe affected your job, or sort of affected the local community.
Well, I'll tell you that when you're in the public sector, and particularly when you work for an elected official, first thing I do every morning when I come to this office is look at the coverage on everything, locally speaking. Our local paper, our weeklies, headlines related to our, the Northwest Florida area, because the truth is, if you don't know what's being said and what's going on and what's concerning people, you're not going to stay in office. The whole game isn't about staying in office. The whole game's about having the right people here to do what we have to do. But a lot of media coverage changes things tremendously in an organization like this. I think sometimes in the private sector, people know that the wind's blowing that direction tomorrow. But in the public sector, when people latch on to things, I mean, activists, that's a big thing to me, because I know it's legitimate. I appreciate what's going on, but I also think there has to be not just awareness of what the community needs, but awareness of who is trying to do what and the good they're undertaking to get it done. A lot of media makes a lot of pressure, and we live in a pressure cooker here with our customers, motorists, citizens, taxpayers every day. Pressure cookers, let that pressure off a little at a time. You can't quite, but media, it doesn't make it easier, but it does enable you to move the ball, and that's important. I'm big on media journalism and accurate, true reporting. I just think this is what keeps a nation free. If you don't believe what you're told, that what is being represented to you is something you can count on being true, then we're moving the wrong direction,
Well, thank you. That was a very insightful answer.
Thank you. I have been thrilled to be here with y'all. I just want to say that too. I really have.
Thank you. Becca, do you have any questions?
I don't off the top of my head. I mean,
That's okay.
yeah.
Yeah. I'm just going to refer to your silent colleague back here. Brian, do you have any questions, or is there anything that we should be asking Rich that we haven't yet?
I think y'all covered pretty much everything.
Are there any stories that we should ask him to share while we're here?
None that I would think he'd want to be.
Can I tell them about the wheel?
So will, yes.
We always joke about this, our most difficult collection in the 44 years I've been around. We had one of those huge observation wheels out on Pensacola Beach. If you've ever watched CNN in Atlanta, that's the very same wheel behind. It's not there anymore. They've moved on. But what we discovered when this wheel came here was that they had left a trail of unpaid taxes in prior jurisdictions. The enterprise had such an unusual name, Expo 66 or something, I can't remember the details. But when it came up as this huge delinquent tangible tax account, tangible is personal property, real estate, property taxes, real property. But tangible is a type of personal property tax. Anyway, this huge unpaid bill comes up for tens of thousands of dollars. It's on Pensacola Beach. I said, don't worry, guys, that's bound to be one of those wireless networks out there. They probably got towers everywhere, no worries. before we find out it's the wheel, they've disassembled this thing and hauled it to Atlanta. And the law says in 818, Florida Statute 818, that it is a criminal matter to remove tangible personal property beyond the limits of the county where the statutory lien is created. A consensual lien is one thing, like car payment. I'm going to pay this much every month for 60 months and so forth. But statutory liens are just imposed. You don't sign, okay, I agree to pay these taxes, And we can't sell tax certificates on tangible personal property for that very reason. If you were the guy out there with the lien and all of a sudden your wheel's in Atlanta, now I think Cincinnati or I can't even remember, Cleveland, somewhere. But my point would be, we were not going to lose on that wheel. And we went up to Atlanta, we hired a fencing company, we had to domesticate our lien, our tax warrant in the courts in Atlanta, Georgia. We had people on TV as the big wheel is turning on CNN in the background saying, just some little local politician in Pensacola trying to get reelected. Our boss wasn't even running again. She was retiring after 40-something years here in the office. And I said, I don't care what they say about it. I don't care what they do. We will disassemble that thing and sell it for 21 cents a pound salvage and watch them weep while it happens. They will not do this to us. And they had done it in 2 prior jurisdictions that we knew of. And so after they went through all their thing about, local politician trying to make a name for himself, stay in office, we got every penny. Every penny. And we did not have to fence off that wheel, which we were going to do right there while CNN was live broadcasting. I said, we're going to time this strategically. We're going to be on the TV when we fence this place off and start cutting this thing to pieces and hauling it off. That was our best collection, best story I have about collections. No relation to Superfunds, but there's always a way. And I've learned this with Superfunds too. And would it have come together without media pressure, well-meaning but sometimes misguided activists, these fine people from the EPA I've mentioned, people like Keith Wilkins? There's just no way the outcome would have been what it was without all those people involved. And from our side, it just looked like an anomaly on the tax roll when it all started. I lived here, I knew what was going on, but I didn't connect those dots, But y'all have really made me think in some very positive ways here, and this has just been splendid. Thank
I appreciate it. I have one more question, just while you bring that up. I'm curious if your office was in communication with other counties, maybe across the country, that were dealing with Superfund sites too? Like, is there a network there that you all...
Keith and I had talked a lot about Florida, different situations in Florida. One thing that you learn, even up here in Escambia County, there are only 2 counties when Florida was founded. You probably know this. Escambia was from Pensacola to the Suwannee River, and from the Suwannee to Key West was St. John's, and their county seat was St. Augustine, and ours was Pensacola. Well, I don't know why I'm going into a history lesson on this.
We're here for
well, because you know what? We've been here a heck of a long time. And we look at Florida and we go, we got enough right here, without having to look everywhere else. But another thing we've observed is that Florida has this gold standard in tax certificates, tax deed sales, and liens. You can look around the country, big, Colorado, Arizona, different places, and they've all modeled after what we do. And we have a certificate sale book from 1886 in the clerk's office. This system has worked well for a long, long time. You can look outside of Florida and get ideas for motorist services, how to embed different layers of security in your driver's license, how to address types of fraud and so forth. But when it comes to taxes, you want to, of course, zero in on what you're immediately accountable and responsible for. But you don't have to invent everything. I tell our deputies all the time, I want our neck in the noose with other people. We don't want to be the only one out there doing this, So yes, you do. You look around you, and plus there are counties and people who have a lot of legitimacy, and there are people that are outliers in the oddest ways. And that's what's great about things like education forums and conferences and certification plans. You kind of get to know who's most legitimate. And when they speak your language on something like a Superfund site, I'm listening. And I've talked about these things in conferences myself, but you start putting some of the big brain people like me, I'm joking, but you put experience, it's what I tell people I value the most, wisdom guided by experience. And I've got some we've got people with incredible wisdom, but they don't have enough experience yet. It's coming. But when you find these people around the state that have that combination, you want to listen to them, you want to figure out what they've done, you want to know what the consequences were and see how it might work here. So for Florida, I can say we've engaged this a lot in different meetings, and we've got a proposal for legislation right now to eliminate, that's not the way to say it, to take the statute that says you shall apply for a tax deed application, anything over $5,000, unless 2/3 of your Board of County Commissioners votes not to make the application, because supermajority is, a little better. We've got 5 commissioners, counting to 3, at any rate. I don't know why I'm going into that, other than to say that we want this changed. We don't be forced to have to sell our Superfund sites to citizens or offer it for sale to them in these bidding environments. That's just, it's not the right outcome. So we're trying to change the law now. And tax collectors aren't really about policy. We're about results when it comes to collecting what's on your tax roll. But I don't know if that was exactly responsive, but I tell you, I value my colleagues in Florida. I'm sure there are plenty of good people in other places. We've been to national software meetings and things, and you start hearing what goes on in some other states, you're like, time to get back to Florida. We know what we're doing here. Doesn't seem so crazy to me.
Well, we'll have to follow up with you about the law to see which way the wind blew.
Please do. We've got a new legislative session coming up. The last one's just ended. He's still signing bills, a lot of new laws for July 1, a lot for October 1, and then we'll start all over. And maybe this one will pass. It all depends on what they want the most. And then the appetite is to make homelessness in public places illegal, then you're not going to get something as obscure. I don't know if that's a fair way to say it, but you're not going to get the requirement for tax deed applications as achievement of Superfund sites to seem as glamorous as don't be camping your homelessness on our public lands. So it is really about the will of the legislature and the people who can propose bills. But the Tax Collectors Association has a legislative package every year, and we're like, if no one else is doing this, we need to, because it's not the right way to proceed.
Well, thank you. Well, I know we could sit here and ask you a million more questions, and you've been really generous with us, and we really appreciate it. I want to release you back to your regular duties.
Well,
before I do that, is there anything else that you want to mention or talk about, or just something that we didn't think to ask you that you want to end on?
Well, I just want to say how impressed I am with the Samuel Proctor program that y'all are part of, and just the kind of spirit I felt today with all of you from lunch until we got in here. You guys are going to change the world, and I hope I'll be around to see some of it. I appreciate it. Thanks.
Well, thank you. That's very nice of you, and thanks again.
Thank you.
I do have 3 things
Oh,
to say. One, the will, they did the same thing to Fulton County that they did to us, and the will is now in St. Louis. And as far as the Airbnbs, there is actually some pushback on the Airbnbs through homeowner associations are making it to where it is not allowed. So there is some pushback on different, neighborhoods, even allowing Airbnbs to occur. And the third thing is the certificate sale. We just concluded our certificates, our yearly certificate sale. So.
Right, we sold $12.7 million in liens this year and struck to the county a mere $143,000. So you can see what's going on, and you don't want to see a lot struck to the county. So we've definitely gotten a much better place, and part of it are these Superfunds and situations like that. Thanks for telling us that, Brian.
and will you tell us your full name?
Brian Jackson.
Thanks, Brian. Thank you, Rich.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
For us too. Thank you.